Merry ho ho everyone! So it is officially December, it is the best time of the year, so I want to preface this video just with a little plan for the month, a little bit of an idea of what's going on with my content. So we are doing Christmas themed video essays this month, if you can't tell from the title already. We are going to do 4 Christmas themed video essays. They're going to go out every Monday in the run up to Christmas, but then I'm also hoping to get out another piece of content every Friday, and that's just going to be a little bit more Christmas fun. So Friday content might be a vlog like Christmas markets, or it might be to do with Christmas books or those kind of things. It's just going to be a little bit more fun, festive, getting in the spirit of the season content. If that sounds like something you'll enjoy, please do stick around. I don't normally do the like, comment, subscribe shtick, but I know in the month of December there's a lot of content being pumped out, so if you are interested in what I've briefed you on, please do hit that subscribe button and stick around, comment, let's have some Christmassy conversation. Final bit of this little intrusion at the start of this video is if my voice starts going very gravelly, sounds like it's about to break, goes a bit husky, I am recovering from being ill, so please excuse it for me. But with that all being said, let's get into today's video. When I was a teenager, I became self-appointed head of the Rose Family Christmas, or head of Holly. What that means is I over-hoard Christmas. Each year I had the Christmas decorations up earlier and earlier. I took on the responsibility of putting the tree up, of deciding where decorations were going to go. I imposed a colour scheme. It is red, white and gold, and a true gold, not a champagne gold. Over the years, my mum and I have gone out in search of the perfect baubles, garlands and wreaths to fit the vision that I have. I controversially outlawed tinsel. The only reason there is tinsel behind me right now is because I am balling on a student budget at the moment, and I'm still lobbying for the switch from coloured Christmas lights on the tree to warm white lights. Every year I spend hours decorating the house, wrapping gifts with the perfect matching ribbons, and baking all sorts of Christmas goodies, whether that's keeping up family traditions that I inherited from my nan, making these mini bite-sized sausage rolls for the family to enjoy on Christmas Day, or finding the perfect vegan bakes to try out with my sister. Christmas, quite frankly, is my favorite time of year, and it's the only thing I like about winter, because when it's dark at 4 p.m, quite frankly, my serotonin levels are not a fan. I genuinely love it, and I love the traditions we've created for ourselves because they fit us and our family, and it's been really fun creating new traditions at university and seeing a peek of what maybe my own Christmases will look like in the future when I have a house and a family. But I can also acknowledge that it is a very busy, very stressful, and very expectation heavy time of year. And in gaining the self-appointed title of head elf Holly about 9 years ago now, I unknowingly adopted quite a few of those stressful activities for myself. In looking around, I started to notice a lot of the responsibilities I adore, the planning, the decorating, the buying and wrapping of gifts, they so often fall to women. And in light of Ellie Maciera-Fielding for the New Feminist calling it the most patriarchal time of year, I started to wonder whether it's time to consider those traditional elements of Christmas that have been passed down through generations that may not be shared equally between family members based on gender. So that brings me to the question of this video. Is Christmas a feminist issue? Let's talk traditions, gender roles, and mental load in the festive season. Although Christmas at its core is a Christian religious holiday, I think many of us don't necessarily celebrate it for its religious context. In my house, Christmas itself, the festive period, that is a tradition and it's a time to spend with family. We don't focus on the story of the Nativity. A classic Christmas story for me is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Advent is something that brings chocolate every morning, and I actually am recording this on the 1st of December and have an advent calendar to open right after this. It's my little treat. And Christmas carols are pretty songs that my mum and I sing across the kitchen to each other. And where the traditions of Christmas may once have focused on the religious and church-centric aspects of the holiday, I think it's safe to say that now culturally, there are a lot of traditions that are associated with Christmas outside of the church. Think getting matching Christmas pajamas with your family or your partner or your best friend. Think watching Christmas movies with a hot chocolate or a festive coffee. I always like to pop a little bit of Baileys in mine and have whipped cream on top. Think going to Christmas markets and braving the rides if you're far more trusting than me, and participating in Christmas jumper day or office secret Santa. Don't get me wrong, in my infant school we still did a nativity every year. I was a mouse, a star, and a donkey. The year I was a donkey, somehow we were the main characters. We were on stage the whole time. There was about 6 of us, and we had all the characters, the wise men, the shepherds, the angels, Mary and Joseph, coming through in search of a donkey. I'm guessing there's only so many times you can put on the nativity in the same format before even the teachers are begging for a change. Also at school, I would opt to sing with choirs and vocal groups in our carol service every year, and I did once read passages from the Bible at one of these carol services as well. In year 11, I managed to get out of a day of classes by volunteering to help out with our junior school's Christmas carol service. Now, I was a performing arts prefect, so I did prefect some of the younger years choirs, but it wasn't with the junior school. They were just low on numbers. I was asked to go, and hey, I got to hang around a church with pretty stained glass windows rather than learn about titration for the day, so I called it a win. But think about a lot of those events and activities I mentioned. How many of those events, especially the ones when we're young, are organized by mothers? The navigating of what events are happening, when and where, who needs to attend, what costumes are needed. Think the planning, the forethought, and the mental load associated with all of those things. Who is it that takes responsibility for them? Well, at least when I was younger, I remember those responsibilities largely falling to the mothers of the children in my classes. And nowadays, without any kids in our immediate family, our Christmas traditions are a lot more localized into our house specifically, or for me, in whatever iteration I can create Christmas traditions at university. But even then, so many Christmas traditions rely on gifting, cooking, and decorating. They include a vast amount of labor in the pursuit of joy, and that labor often falls to women with the expectation that it's included in household responsibilities. Honestly, if you actually consider the planning, time management, and precision execution needed to manage family commitments on both sides of the family, to manage attendance at necessary carol services and children's nativities, to organize when and where you're going to Christmas markets, and the sorting out of the decorations and the cooking and the shopping and the wrapping. The skills displayed by women in the festive season are quite frankly skills that would be highly desirable on a CV for a management role. Yet so often, this additional labor is just expected to be part of Christmas. It's a thankless task. I can't be the only one who sees, whether in my own life or on social media, that so often women are the ones that end up in the kitchen whilst men are socializing or watching TV. In my family, we have Christmas dinner at about 4 or 5 p.m., so we have it more as an actual dinner rather than a Christmas lunch. And the reason behind that is when we were kids, my mum would have to start prepping to cook whilst we were still unwrapping gifts. And we did start really early anyway. We couldn't have started any earlier because otherwise the person who had put in the effort of shopping and wrapping wasn't getting to see our reaction when we opened the gifts she'd put so much work into. I don't think it's a unique experience to comment on. Say my dad would often ask, "Oh, what did you get?" when I would unwrap a present. And whilst he was always briefed on what presents we were being gifted, a lot of the time I genuinely believe it was because he was unsure what the things we were unwrapping were. Now, with that being said, when we were little kids and we would have gifts that needed assembling, that was my dad's time to shine on Christmas. But as we've got older and that's not necessarily a part of our Christmas day anymore, because like I say, we don't really have any kids in our immediate family, the same gendered division of labor still occurs in relation to cooking. And bear this in mind that nobody in my family likes cooking, so it's not that someone has opted in because they enjoy the experience. The experiences and expectations placed on us at Christmas are gendered ones. And an element of that perhaps comes from traditional division of labour, as noted by the Egalitarian. The traditional female and male stereotypes are nothing but heightened during the festive period, although it must be said that many of the modern man and empowered women are attempting to erode this long tradition. Women typically retreat into their domestic roles, and men stand firm as figureheads of the family. A survey asking people which family member is responsible for sending out Christmas cards, buying the presents, shopping for the food, and cooking on Christmas received an overwhelming majority of votes for the woman of the household. The picture here is clear. At Christmas, if it's a domestic task, then it's the job of a woman. So in light of saying that women's roles are often a lot of the prep and the planning, let's talk a little bit about men's roles. So the Priory completed a survey of 2,000 men 25 and over in the UK discussing pressures at Christmas. The top pressures felt by men at Christmas include 42% saying attending work Christmas parties, 41% saying financial worries, and 30% saying feeling pressure at work, 25% saying worrying about the year ahead, 20% saying spending time with family, and 14% saying job security. Notice how none of these top pressures note those unseen domestic tasks that traditionally fall to women. Another commonly talked about concept in recent years is the idea of the triple shift, where women are balancing holiday commitments with paid work and domestic labor. So stresses of this include pressures at work and financial stability, just like men, alongside unpaid domestic labor and the emotional labor of families as well. Later in this video, we will explore a little bit more a gendered view of stress levels and mental health statistics at Christmas and in the month of December. Obviously, I'm not saying mental health is a competition, but I do think there's a gendered aspect to what roles and stresses we take on at times like Christmas, and that's what I want to consider. So why are there still gendered roles and gendered stresses happening at Christmas? Well, I think there are multiple aspects we can consider here. Traditionally, domestic labor, like your cooking and cleaning, has been left to the women, and as such, men and boys are not necessarily taught how to complete these tasks. So they may prefer to avoid these tasks altogether or use weaponized incompetence so that they don't risk trying and failing. So it's not an ego blow when they can't do something or get something wrong. Similarly, you could consider that when the status quo suits us, we are far less likely to challenge it or even recognize that it's a thing we are upholding. Another aspect of this, specifically at Christmas time, is that traditionally men would live public working lives and women would stay in the domestic sphere of the house. And as such, that division of labor seemed more fair because women weren't working. So where men would financially provide for the family, women would nurture. However, that division of labor doesn't seem to have shifted as more and more households become dual income. I've really seen an uptake of people discussing this on TikTok in recent years, how they didn't realize until they were older how much of Christmas magic is actually their mum. I think some of that's students coming home from university and recognizing how hard it is to organize Christmas traditions when they've had to do those things off their own back for the first time in their uni cities, or finally being old enough to recognize that your mum fills everyone's stocking, but hers has hardly anything in. So I think there are so many things at this time of year that make Christmas feel special and magical. But I do think we have to consider and challenge who we place the mental load on in order for Christmas to be perfect. Just because something has happened for a long time doesn't mean it should still happen. And to understand why this gender division is still happening, I want to consider a little bit of how Christmas is portrayed in the media. How often have you watched a Christmas film that completely ignores the unequal division of labor at Christmas in the household? How often do you see a Christmas being hosted and it's the woman rushing around taking coats and offering drinks whilst the men are sat around in armchairs? Well, I argue some of this gender division goes right back to Father Christmas or Santa and Mrs. Claus. Mrs. Claus is always there, but always without a name. She's comic relief or in the background baking cookies. And Santa or Father Christmas is the one we credit with all of the hard work for Christmas. Those of you who have watched the 2024 Boots Christmas advert will know there's been some major uproar surrounding the depiction of Santa and Mrs. Claus. Some of this uproar is innately rooted in racism, but there is also misogyny involved, with hashtag boycott Boots trending because Boots dared to show an advert where Santa was sleeping in a chair while Mrs. Claus was directing the elves, helping pick and wrap gifts and loading up the sleigh. And many had an issue with the tagline spoken at the end of the advert.
You thought it was all him.
For many of us, it isn't unfathomable that there is a woman behind the scenes making sure everything runs smoothly. But I have to wonder why some men felt so affronted by this depiction of Mrs. Claus that feels so similar to how women experience the festive period. Like I say, this isn't just an issue around the fact that we're centering Mrs. Claus. It's the fact that we're centering a person of color as Mrs. Claus. It's the fact you have gender neutral language used in the advert, and the fact that the people involved in the advert help to actively challenge traditional depictions of gender binaries, especially in adverts surrounding beauty and makeup. Now, we know that the far-right media will love to call this woke and say they are pushing an agenda, although personally I viewed this as a very authentic and cohesive approach to inclusion and representation. The demographic they are trying to target with this advert are the people represented in the advert itself. And whilst I know some people will inherently just have issues with that inclusive representation, I can't help wondering why people also had issues with the fact that Mrs. Claus was the one in the workshop putting effort into Christmas, when that feels like a very common female experience of Christmas. Similarly, the first season of the Santa Clauses series touched on this idea of Mrs. Claus not really having an identity outside of being Santa's wife. I argue perhaps the comedic nature of this series didn't allow this topic to be explored as fully as it could have been. We go from Mrs. Claus Carol having this updo that is definitely meant to age her to suddenly taking all these pins out in a projectile style scene to suddenly her appearing far younger. She's wearing jeans again, and it's interesting how that's a comedic plot point, but it actually brought up some really interesting things that I hadn't fully considered before. The fact that Mrs. Claus doesn't have a first name. That character in the series does, because we met her before she was Mrs. Claus in the movies. She was Carol. She was a principal at a high school. Suddenly, Scott Calvin, Santa, struggles to remember his wife's first name. And it's comedic, it's a plot point. It's a very real point about how we depict Christmas. Because we're talking about how the work and sacrifices women put in for Christmas and their families often get ignored, or at least go without acknowledgement. And then also coming into play is the pressure from social media to have the best Christmas ever, or feeling the need to cling to this traditional Christmas that you see on TV or in films, even if that doesn't suit your family or your lifestyle. The festive period should work for you and your family. It should not be about bending over backwards to try and fit into a mold of what you think the festive period should be just because it's traditional. And in terms of the pressure from social media, think about people like the Kardashian family. We get images of these lavish place settings and extravagant Christmas Eve parties. There's eye-catching outfits and coordinated wrapping color schemes and editorial ready, meticulously decorated houses. It's a picture perfect holiday season, and one that those of us who can't afford decorating or catering services, who don't have assistants to help with Christmas shopping, or staff ready to source the perfect tablescape for us, all of that would take us a lot more time and effort to get done compared to the millionaire reality star influencers of the Kar Jenner family. And Hallmark Christmas films are another culprit of the perfect Christmas. No matter how cheesy they are, I am a sucker for those films, I can't lie. But they always depict the perfectly assembled gingerbread houses and the professional level icing on sugar cookies. Yet they don't show the time and effort necessary to make such activities look effortless. And that's all without considering the aesthetics we see attached to these activities all across Pinterest and TikTok. I don't know about you, but when I do Christmas baking, it includes making an entire mess. We have so many devices that we engage with daily and so much more media readily available at our fingertips than ever before that I think it makes sense that we unconsciously internalize the pressure to emulate what we see. And a lot of this media is usually targeted towards women. Even Hallmark Christmas films are built to appeal to the female gaze. So, is it fair to say that women internalize more of these stress factors at Christmas than men? Not only does Christmas include the incredible stress of the physical presence and commitment required, although quite frankly, sometimes it feels like running a marathon and I'm not a runner, but the additional mental load this brings at a time of year where quite frankly a lot of people struggle anyway is a whole other issue. We are expected to smile through stress and exhaustion, the constant consideration of what to get people, and feeling sleep deprived because you're attending all of these events and occasions and not having time to relax. It's meant to be fun, and honestly, at times it turns into a burden, especially when you know you're taking on the emotional weight of everyone's happiness on Christmas Day. I'm guilty of this. I want everyone to have the best Christmas ever, so I put a lot of pressure on myself to try and make this the most magical time of year. So, here I want to discuss how the mental load affects different people at Christmas and how these expectations may link to mental health statistics around the festive period. According to YouGov in 2019, women struggle with their mental health as a result of Christmas more than men do, with 51% of women saying they feel stressed at Christmas compared to 35% of men, 35% of women saying they feel anxious at Christmas compared to 23% of men, and some stats that fall a little bit more closely on gender divisions, such as 27% of women and 25% of men say they feel depressed around Christmas, and 24% of women and 21% of men reported feeling lonely. Now, like I've said before, none of this is to say that men don't feel the effect of worrying mental health statistics in the festive period. However, would it be a radical concept to consider that perhaps men feel lonely at Christmas because they aren't expected to be as involved and therefore as connected? And then on the flip side, you have women who may feel lonely because they don't feel they can fully connect with people at the holidays because they have so much pressure to get everything done. Now, I'm not trying to say that this is something on an individual level that men are to blame for, but rather I'm pointing out a system that has been designed to push off the domestic labor of Christmas onto women and thus allows men to remain at a distance from it under the guise of being the strong and stoic leader of the family who only really gets involved when it's time to carve the turkey that someone else has slaved over making. Similarly, if men are not connected to the holidays in this way of planning and executing the magic, then this perhaps suggests why they feel more stressed to provide financially for this time of year, even if nowadays the financial contributions of households are more equal than ever. The Priory notes that there's also the added pressure of financial worries and feelings of guilt if you can't afford to buy your children or loved ones the presents they really want. Christmas also comes at the end of the year, so if you've had an especially difficult one, perhaps with the loss of a job or other financial difficulties throughout the year, this may have added further pressure to the idea of buying presents. So I argue perhaps without having the actual presents or execution to worry about, perhaps this is why men feel these financial stresses as one of the top pressures in the festive period. There's also age aspects to mental health at Christmas. According to YouGov, over half of 18 to 24-year-olds say their mental health is better at the festive period, whilst only 3 in 10, so 30% of those 55 or older, say that their mental health is better in the festive period. So this perhaps suggests those more likely to carry responsibilities at the Christmas period, or those more likely to have older families where it's harder to organize seeing everyone. Declining mental health at Christmas is a pervasive issue. The egregious amount of pressure we place on the festive period is only one part of that conversation. It's a complex puzzle constructed of multiple factors within our cultures and communities. Similarly, the pervasive issue of arguments at Christmas also adds to this emotional pressure cooker. I can't be the only one who's seen these TikToks with timestamp schedules of Christmas where people joke about there being designated times to argue because it happens every year like clockwork. This is so expected, so normalized for this time of year because of the high stress environment. Similarly, we see a lot of appeals at Christmas surrounding an increase in domestic violence, both for the high stress environment and the high alcohol environment, kind of like when the World Cup is on. And I think this year, especially in the light of the American election and kind of this conservative turn that's happening in quite a few countries, there's going to be a lot of people that feel quite anxious surrounding political conversations that may come up in the festive period and political tensions. So, in light of this, in 2020, the NSPCC estimated that at least 15,000 children were living in a household where domestic abuse took place during the 2 weeks of Christmas. And Women's Aid, which is a national charity working to end domestic abuse against women and children, notes it usually sees a 15% increase of women accessing their services after the festive period. So, is there too much pressure on Christmas, and are we placing too much pressure on having the best Christmas ever? So none of this is to shame those who enjoy putting effort into Christmas, or to say that there aren't households where the division of labor is more equal. As my generation is growing older and starting to host our own holidays, I think it's evident that we're being more analytical about what attitudes we saw in our own families and what we will not allow for ourselves. We are able to uphold those boundaries early and get in front of those stereotypes a little bit. However, Sarah Mansell for LV sums it up perfectly. If you love wrapping presents, making the house look nice, and cooking the turkey, then you do you. But you should never feel like you have to do it because you're a woman. You should do it because you like it. Don't assume a role because of old-fashioned mindsets, but do it because you want to. I started this video by talking about how much I adore taking on decorating, wrapping gifts, and baking at Christmas. I'm the one who searches out carol services and Christmas markets and goes in search of the perfect fixings for the holiday hot chocolate. I will never shame others for enjoying that too, but I can also wholeheartedly say that I don't love every aspect of it, and I wouldn't take on every aspect of it were I hosting a whole Christmas myself. Primarily, I do not like cooking. I don't like cooking for myself, let alone other people. That is a job that I would very quickly look to pass off to someone else before I ever considered myself doing it. Whether that would be a partner, a family member, or a catering company, I would pay someone to do that for me before I considered doing it. Because quite frankly, my cooking skills, they leave something to be desired. I can bake, I can't cook. I think it's a lot more about understanding what makes your Christmas enjoyable and sharing the load otherwise. It's inevitable that there's going to be elements of stress around Christmas. I mean, if you're on a time crunch to get the Christmas dinner sorted, that is a high stress environment. If you leave all your shopping till Christmas Eve, like I saw a lot of men doing when I worked in retail, that is a high stress environment. Quite frankly, that's why I've started celebrating Christmas from November onwards, because I feel less like I'm on a time crunch to get everything done that I want to get done. But all of that does not mean we should be so overrun by stress that we can't enjoy the holiday period. We shouldn't have anyone in the family sacrificing their own enjoyment of the Christmas magic just to make it magical for everyone else. So if you're someone who's used to sitting back at Christmas and having the magic happen around you, it takes very little effort to offer your help with a task or suggest that you take point with something. That could be saying that you'll organize the day you're all going to decorate the tree, or agreeing that you're going to split the responsibility of finding gifts for family members. Maybe you're going to take point with your grandfather this year, or maybe you're going to go out and pick up some of those in-store orders someone else has made to help them out. You could decide you're going to become a baker and do the Christmas cookies, or offer to go and do the big Christmas food shop so the cook doesn't have to. Think of all the tasks that happen to make Christmas run. And if there's ones that you really enjoy, take some responsibility in making those things happen. And if you can't think of anything, there's always volunteering to help with washing up post Christmas dinner or tidying up post party. Christmas is a magical time, but there's something even more magical about working together to make amazing memories. Believe head elf Holly when I say, when you know you've helped to create the magic, it makes everything feel just a little bit more memorable.